program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
I hear some scribbling there, Ash. Working on something?
Taking notes. Taking names and taking notes. I'm kidding.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Inside Mojo, where each week we take you back through 20 years of YouTube history through the WatchMojo lens. I'm your host, Rob. With me, as always, WatchMojo CEO and co-founder Ashkan Karbasfrooshan. What's new, Ash?
Not much. Very busy. Things are good. I won't lie. 2025 es el año de la vindicación. I won't lie.
I don't understand any of that, but it sounds
2025 is the year of vindication. I mean, I'm looking still for this Reddit thread where apparently they talk about me crashing out, which I think is bullshit. I think that's my daughter's just like, saying that. But
I also noticed that comment and went looking for it myself and couldn't find it. But let's talk about that before we get into the subject of this week's episode. We stirred up a little controversy last week talking about the launch of Miss Mojo in the woke era, and there was quite a lot of engagement on those videos. Did you expect that type of reaction?
Yes and no. I mean, I think what we discuss is interesting. Hello, Mohammed. I think what we discuss is interesting for many storyteller entrepreneurs and also fans of YouTube. But I also don't think that many people care. So I'm always surprised when there's any engagement. But I think it was kind of self-proving, or, it was like it was like a tautology. It was like it demonstrated what we were saying, which was in the 2010s, everybody had a reason to be offended by something, somebody. And the reality is they didn't even understand, like you see me, I'm like customer service man. I replied and I was like, oh, you misunderstood. And I even said, if I misspoke, it's on me. But they kind of ultimately summarized the 2010s, which was a decade where people were just offended, thin-skinned. And the reality is nobody gives a fuck about what you or I think. This is the world of like, whether you're an employee or an entrepreneur, whether you're a storyteller or a technologist. Yeah, guess what? People have their own realities. They have their own vantage point. And if you're just going to automatically jump to conclusions and make assumptions, as they say, you're making an ass of you and me type of thing. But it just showed that I'm like, yeah, these people in like a decade ago were whining and complaining and not even understanding what the hell they were talking about. So again, you listen, you don't want to have a big head, but it just validates the whole vindication that, yeah, it's like most people are lost and it's fine. I'm lost. I was lost. I will be lost. Like, I'm not any different. But this is the internet. People are quick to dislike, unsub, be offended. But when you actually talk to them, you're like, yeah, they're either like just ill-informed, misinformed, uninformed, and you just move on. It's like Keanu Reeves says, if you say 1 + 2 = 8, good for you. You figure it out life. Get out of my fucking way. Absolutely. I'm not here to deal with the morons.
Well, building off of that era of the 2010s, this week, we're talking about WatchMojo's 2020 agenda, or what are the plans for 2020. So what can you say about that? Now we're looking towards 2030, but a few years back you were looking towards 2020. What were the big goals?
So yeah, I mean, look, when you're in business school, very early you study company life stages. Polaroid, Kodak, whatever, when they started were disruptors, and then by the end of their journey they were being disrupted. As I used to tell the team, even the disruptors like WatchMojo, we disrupted VH1, MTV, cable, whatever, by embracing YouTube. Even we were vulnerable to being disrupted by competition, innovation, demographics, whatever. So about 9-ish years ago, just so happened that I was reading Henry Luce, the founder of Time Inc., called The Publisher. It was his biography. I had read The Publisher, which was the biography of William Randolph Hearst. I had read, and it's right there, they're all here actually, I Want My MTV, which was a oral history of MTV. And I did come to the kind of conclusion that, yeah, maybe I had gotten a bit complacent myself. Maybe this, after 7 years of hardship that most people wouldn't even want to put up with, we had found some success. And like 2012, 13, 14, 15 was like, oh, we're actually making money, and we're not, I'm not donating blood to keep the lights. I'm not selling my kidney to make payroll, which wasn't that far off.
That was like the next stage after mortgaging your
yeah, I know, but I mean, I didn't go to there was no bloodletting, but it was, but I remember vividly, I was sitting actually on, not this couch, some other couch in my old place, drinking a little bit of scotch late at night, reading Henry Luce's, The Publisher. He had founded Time. He eventually branched out into like Life, which was a very successful magazine with just pictures, kind of like Instagram before there was Instagram, 50 years before. Then People, the most successful magazine, Sports Illustrated, Fortune. And that's like kind of where we got the idea from Miss Mojo and everything else. But I did kind of just look in the mirror or at the wall at that point. It was like 2 a.m. as I'm reading this book. And I was like, yeah, I was like, I've gotten a bit complacent. And if I want to be CEO, I have to be open to take risks and real risks. And it was like a flip of a switch. So in 2015-16, I said, hey, let's look ahead to WatchMojo 2020 and think of, you know, iterative, innovative, disruptive, evolutionary, revolutionary things that we could do, some of which turned out to pay off, some of which were flagrant failures. But that's what WatchMojo 2020 was. And if you've heard me talk about WatchMojo 2030, it's, oh, here we are, 2025. As I look at, as we're entering our third phase of growth in the company life cycles, which are, you know, early onset, you know, early stage, and then growth, maturity, and then you get into decline. And if you are good at what you do and not clueless, you try to then reverse that or even avoid decline. And then so we kind of went through that in the 2020 era by finding a second growth spurt. And then 23, 24 were hard, largely because of what was happening with the industry. But then in the last 9-10 months, we've started to grow again. And it's great. And I told the team earlier, I gave everybody shout outs, hats off, and props. I said, most companies don't get to experience a second growth spurt. We're entering our third. So I was like, hats off. You know, let's keep it up. And, you know, as an entrepreneur, you're like, you're nothing without your team. So I was like, just pointing to that. And I said, but doesn't mean that like success is a fait accompli, so to speak, you know?
Right. Before we continue, we have a poll that should be going up on our YouTube page. So go check that out. If you're interested, we want to know, what should a company do to secure their future? Should they innovate at the risk of total failure, keep doing what they're doing, or, as some companies do, just pretend to innovate, but actually keep doing what they're doing anyway? So let us know what you think is the best bet for a company to kind of secure their future. And we will revisit those results at the end of the podcast. So you mentioned companies going through life cycles. Back in 2016, what was the life cycle period that WatchMojo was in, and how was the YouTube landscape changing at that time?
It's a great question, Black Rob. So the reason for that...
I'm going to ask you about that one in a bit.
No, so why do you think I call you Black Rob?
I'm not too sure. Does it have something to do with...
I'm assuming you're on a blacklist somewhere.
Some recent industry news?
Yeah. So
I wouldn't know if I'm on a blacklist.
But you might be. So it's funny because in 2016, until June when we got hacked, and until I really saw competition, like I could sense it. But 2016, I remember Labor Day, one of my good high school buddies was like, my girlfriend's turning 40. We're going to Vegas. Let's go. And a couple months before that, we had been hacked right before I went to Greece. So I was in a state of mind of like, we are a sitting duck. And as much as the team, they do what they do and I love them, and they have zero awareness of like the oncoming fire. You know, they're in the trenches. I respect that. You're on top, kind of. So I remember vividly that Labor Day weekend when I was then stopping in Vegas and then going to San Fran to meet a gentleman who was Paul Allen, Bill Gates's money manager. Sorry, Paul Allen was Bill Gates's co-founder at Microsoft, and he had a gentleman, we'll call him Tom. It doesn't matter. Great guy. But so Tom was Paul Allen's money manager. And Paul was enamored by social video, YouTube, and all that. And he wanted to invest or, you know, kind of join us as an advisor. And when he was doing his due diligence, you know, it's very easy for me as a CEO founder to be appreciative and the glass is half full. But when somebody wants to take an interest in your company, they're going to kind of look at everything. They're going to flip you over and, give you a root canal where you don't want to be inspected. And so he was like, your competition, he was like, you have a lot of competition and you don't seem to be taking it seriously. And so there was a company who just by coincidence happened to be in our backyard in Montreal. And they had adopted a very, more Moneyball kind of bottom line oriented approach to topic selection, thumbnails. Everything was, very much, gaming the system, so to speak. But, and you happened to work there at the time, I believe. And so, and I'll name it, it's Valnet. It's not a big deal. It's not, we'll discuss it now because it's interesting and I've sat on it for a few days. And my tendency would be to say nothing because frankly, if Coca-Cola finds out that Pepsi has a rat problem, Coca-Cola is actually not going to put a spotlight on that because any normal person is like, well, do you motherfuckers also have a rat problem? If Pepsi learns that if Pepsi learns that Coca-Cola like decays teeth, they're not going to be like, haha, look at these losers. They're like, well, doesn't your, so it's not like generally I wouldn't. But again, this is meant to be instructive. But so in 2016-17, everybody that would approach me was like, Ash, you're a bit idealistic. You've hired all these English majors and communications majors and journalism guys, and you have the liberal arts guys who are playing their banjos and, knitting. But Valnet has hired all these, and you could confirm since you work there, they've hired all these business people, these analysts. Also, all of them, the founders started off in the adult industry, the porn industry.
Yeah, this is
normal. Yeah, this is normal. There's no shame. I mean, I've also always, because when people ask me, you don't want to knock people. So I was like, look, I go, yeah, they're formidable in that the porn industry has always been the trailblazer of best and worst practices. Mm-hmm. But in my heart and my head and my soul and all that, I was like, but that's not where I think our beacon should be, And I wasn't even saying that's a downward spiral, but I was like, they are aiming. That's the article, The Rap did it again. When I saw this, I didn't even factual. I just sent it to you. I was like, you worked there. Did you read this? I didn't really want to even share
and I didn't know. So I read it right away.
So you were there. I'll shut up take a couple of minutes, please. So when were you there? What was your experience? I don't want to dwell too much. Again, this is not about them. It's more about how, as an entrepreneur, you have to stay true to your own principles, even when people are telling you, supposedly, this is the way you have to operate. So when were you there? What was your experience like? Because you approached me in 2020. I assume you had already left, but I would love to just get your thoughts.
Yeah, I approached you after I had left already. I'd been working there for 6 years. I got hired in 2013, right out of university. So I had just graduated with a degree in journalism and English Lit. I got hired as an editor. I was working on their website, The Richest, which was pretty big at the time. And the company was small back then. It was only 25 employees or something like that. And it was actually very exciting to work there because it was growing fast. It was very motivating. And then it started to grow really fast. And then we, hired a lot of people. The company was really growing. Eventually, they launched a YouTube division, which I transferred over to, and then started working on their channel Screen Rant on YouTube, among others. And then, as we just mentioned, company life cycles, like the YouTube thing kind of started to plateau. And that's where we started to struggle a little bit because, as you said, there are people who demand constant growth. And when that stops, then it's kind of like they turn their attention to other things. So the YouTube thing kind of fizzled out. I got laid off in 2019. And that's when I approached you because I was well aware of WatchMojo as a direct competitor in the YouTube space. And so, we just took it from there. And
I know not any of the principals. I knew somebody that was there and they were like, WatchMojo's success was, but there were so many others. I mean, they were one. It just so happened they were in our backyard. Look, I don't know too many employees who left WatchMojo to join them. I know a lot who left there to join us. A week ago, I was like, hey, guys, in a month, it's Shakespeare's birthday. We should do top 10 poets or playwrights. No way in a fucking million years would they want to do that. But I've always believed, and been naive, more content. So the point I'm getting at, again, we can move on. We're not here to talk about that. But I think the lesson I would love for entrepreneurs and storytellers and just people to take is when you're on your journey to try to figure out your own purpose and find your own kind of course to success, let alone your path to happiness, you're going to get derailed by a lot of people that are just pointing to things that are not necessarily the way to do things. And, you know, I said, okay, we're not going to become, you know, National Enquirer or whatever. But I did kind of talk to the team and just say, because we prioritize the content, and because now there, you know, the themes we've discussed on this series, democratization of publishing, no barriers to entry for distribution, I was like, guys, I am fine to always just put content first, stories first, hire people, not care about the money, be long-term greedy, not, you know, put people. But I was like, y'all have to start paying attention to analytics. You have to look at what does well. We can't pretend. So in some ways, as much as I remember vividly, I think we were at the Cosmopolitan with my wife, who's one of the co-founders, and we were with friends, so we were supposed to be partying and whatnot. I remember vividly moments of like anxiety and angst, because I was like, all these people are coming to me who are industry pros, investors, acquirers, and they're like, well, why don't you do this or that? And I was like, I don't think it's the way to go. Now, I want to talk, when I talk about vindication, we never, this is very anecdotal, but this is also like, whatever. The degree of not giving a fuck is off to a whole other level. I never, being Iranian, Canadian, very diplomatic, very demure, and nobody's going to call me demure, but I would never go up to the team who is happy, who've been here for 20 years and be like, why don't you go write about what an amazing company this is? Never would I have the balls, the shame, the courage, the audacity. So because a lot of our VPs and managers after 10, 15 years were guys and gals I hired out of school and a bit green, they would be like, oh, but look, so-and-so left. Clearly they were unhappy. Okay, it happens, you know, 1 out of 20, 1 out of 100. And they would go on Glassdoor and they would be like, write just whatever. And I was like, fine. I was like, it's online. I love democracy. I love freedom of speech. I came from a fucking country that if you said, I like wine, they would cut your balls off. So my principles were very different. I was like, let them speak. It's fine. Like, it's a shame they never spoke to us, but let them. But there's a saying where it's like a CFO tells a CEO, what if we don't train our what if we invest in our employees and they leave? And then the other guy goes, well, what if we don't invest in them and they stay? You know? Yeah. So I did realize as well that I'm like, because we never asked people who are happy to communicate about their experience here, we created a vacuum where people who are unhappy, naturally, they had some sense. They weren't comfortable to speak up. It didn't work for them. They didn't want a 9-to-5 job. Maybe they thought they were Scorsese and they weren't. Maybe they thought they were Spielberg and they were vegetable lasagna. It doesn't matter. But I'm like, yeah, we created this vacuum, this gap. So for a while, our Glassdoor sucked. It was just one after another complaint. And it's like, we had a small team. I knew who it was. I would reply saying, thank you. It's a shame you feel this way. Myself, because I'm a customer service guy, you know. But the funny thing was this before I saw the rap article, I got one of these generic like emails. They're like, we now, because of this law in California, could force Glassdoor to delete negative reviews. I was going to write an article. You know, I had to think of the angle. I would never, ever want anybody to remove anything bad, you know. Mm-hmm. It's just the way I am. But again, I feel vindication because I'm like, what an organ, and we're not talking about acne or this is a general life thing, you know. It's like Buddha sitting here on a mountain. I was like, you have to, as a young individual, also be aware of these things. Like you could read 2 things and like the comments, you don't know, you react, you know, the comments to last week's episode. So I was like, yeah, you know what? If you are not Rob, but let's say Dick, whatever, Richard, you're Richard and you're looking to work, you have to be smart. You have to read between the lines. You could read one Glassdoor or hotels.com, TripAdvisor. It's not about general. Do you ever leave a hotel when you're happy and rush to say how much you love that hotel?
No, but it's occurred to me that, especially like particularly with Amazon reviews, if I'm reading those and wanting to know about a product, and it's actually helpful to see people leaving 5 stars and because that will really encourage me to buy.
But how many people go and put the 5 stars?
There tend to be more negative reviews than positive.
Yeah, well, it's not. The reality is good places will get the good reviews, but you generally have more of a tendency to go complain. Like today I told our bank, I said, I'm taking away my business personally because I go, this is the third time I've asked you for something and you suck. You clearly don't care. We're moving. And they were calling me all morning. It is unfortunately when you're unhappy that you speak up, but that doesn't represent that this bank could be otherwise really great. So bringing it all together, Jambandi, as they say in Farsi. When I hear people complaining a decade ago about Miss Mojo, I take it seriously, but you also have to drown out the haters, the noise. When I would read the odd, we had like 100 people that would never leave if I would fucking pay them to leave because they were happy, comfortable. I mean, you've been here a few years, but again, like I paid so much attention to that one negative feedback and I've learned, fuck it, it's all good. Like you can't make everybody happy. So when I saw that article, I was like, look, at the end of the day, that is the choice. You could grow, you could focus on return on capital, return on this, but that comes at a heavy expense to people and humans. And, we are a big company. We have like 50 full-timers, another 50 freelancers. Sometimes when I talk about business, I say it. I go, hey, I don't pretend to be running General Electric or Google, Facebook, TikTok. Well, TikTok's different because it's owned by China. But like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, all these companies got to where they are because they didn't give a fuck about people. So early on as an entrepreneur, you have to make that choice. It's like, if you care about people, then I got news for you. You cannot maximize your size. But if you don't care about that, then you could have a great company and a great environment. But you then get the advisors who come to you and go, why aren't you more like these guys? I'm like, those guys that shot a kid in the back, for the record, aired a 14-year-old getting raped. Just saying. That's what the Rap article said. So, when I see these articles, I don't send it back to the guy that when I was on vacation was emailing me, blasting me, saying I'm an idiot and this is the way to go. I'm like, yeah, this is why I didn't really put much stock in what you said. And you're fucking Paul Allen's money manager. Mm-hmm. So when little Joey there on YouTube is like, I don't like Ash said woke. I'm like, okay, thank you. Just move on. Just, anyway. Vindication. Somebody said like, oh, Ash is passive aggressive. Do you want to see aggressive Ash? I don't think anybody wants. You want passive aggressive Ash. Passive aggressive Ash is a better version of Ash than crazy psychotics. And you know what? Tom Brady, the biggest sociopath ever. Embrace your sociopathy. Yeah, serious.
Harness it in healthy ways, I think.
Mm-hmm. Balance.
In the media industry, is WatchMojo unique in the way that we treat employees or value employees?
Okay, but I don't want to make this about employees, including employees. I've always believed Herb Keller, founder of Southwest Airlines, who is now dead, born on the same day as I, March 12th, stakeholder. Everybody's important. He put employees first and said, if your employees are happy, they'll take care of your clients. Because of the nature of YouTube, I said audience first. I said, if your audience is happy, then your employees are enjoying what they do. And then, yeah, your clients, your shareholders, and everybody else. I always, from the beginning, adopted a very servant leadership, but also stakeholder mindset, because I knew it's not even altruistic. It's self-serving in the long term. So yeah, we are unique, but that's also why after 20 years, we're not like a company that's worth $1 billion. I was at a social thing. One guy was like, are you a billionaire? I'm like, do you understand math? I'm like, how would we be? What do you think? Like, we're not YouTube, we're WatchMojo, It's a trade-off. I sleep well at night, but it's also a journey where things used to bother me. And now, even today, I had an employee asking me some questions and they were like, so-and-so. And I was like, you do understand I care about you and so-and-so. But I'm like, most people in my shoes don't give 2/3 of zero fucks about all that. So I'm willing to bend a bit, but I'm like, every time we make exceptions for people, it doesn't really work because people lose sight of perspective. But I will take it. I love the culture we have. But I've also learned it's a bit like when I pick up my daughters, they're so lost about the real world. But I'm like, they're teenagers. That's not like they're not here to understand all these other.
They've got their own stuff going on.
But also they're young. Mm-hmm. They're not, they didn't sign up for anyway. So yeah, we are different and I love it. It's like, I think there's that meme of the New York Jets player, Michael Clemens, where he's like, you see him, he's like, I'm in that mode. I'm not here to teach anybody things that they don't want to learn. Mm-hmm. So, if somebody is like, oh, Miss Mojo is gendering or this and that, I'm like, okay, maybe this is why you're not where you want to be in your life. Just go fix yourself before you come criticize us.
Well, I think the thing too is that people have opinions that they're not willing to change, even if they get an explanation.
Hey man, people are not going to like this. The most closed-minded, fucking useless people were the DEI crowd. Those are the most rigid people who would just sit there and have a very rigid view of what they thought was good or evil. They had brought nothing to the conversation. And then when you actually challenge them on what real diversity is, what real equity is, what real inclusion is, then they just kind of like trailed off the conversation. And at some point you're like, you're not giving me anything intellectually challenging or stimulating. You're just showing me that you're like repeating tropes and all these things that you're supposedly against. You are manifesting that. And now, yeah, I'm like, I don't have time for that. Like I don't have to prove anything to you. Like challenge me, debate me, bring something. But if you're really lost, and after a few efforts, you're still lost, yeah, you know what? It's great. Here's a boat. We're going to push you off the boat or just jump off.
We'll see them down in the comments again this week. So going back to 2016, it was a time when competition was growing. WatchMojo didn't really have the first movers advantage that it did when it started out, when YouTube was younger. And it was kind of like a hyper competition time. How did you guys deal with that? And how did that factor into your plans for the years following that?
So when I talk to other entrepreneurs I advise or invest, I always tell them, I'm like, you don't have to go for these BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals, which could kill you and generally don't pan out. I said, just break it down into like baby steps. That movie, Baby Steps, with De Niro and Bill Murray, I think. I was like, you could break it into iterative things. Miss Mojo was not revolutionary. It was what we were doing for a male audience. We did it for the Disney crowd. Mm-hmm. You could also be a bit more evolutionary and be like, okay, let's say we are, producing content and there's an element of factual or trivia. So maybe we could get into, trivia and use technology to leverage all the questions that human beings have created, auto-generate them automagically. Okay, that's evolutionary. And then revolutionary was like, okay, maybe we develop a show that we sell to HBO. Much harder, very different dynamics. So I think for us, that was a great way to also say that, hey, you know what? We might put a bit more energy into Miss Mojo because it's an easier pivot, for lack of a better word. But yeah, you know what? If I'm like signing a development deal with Sonar Entertainment to launch a show like Succession or Billions, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to come to the team and be like, hands on, we're all going to get in a writer's room, which would just be fun, but a big ass distraction. So I think when you're looking at innovation, disruption, risk, and all that, there's a quadrant. It's, iterative, evolutionary, revolutionary. And if you could make small bets across those, you generally, as we demonstrated, find a second path to growth and a third, as we did, path to growth. But I do think most people get complacent. Human nature. Once you're successful, why do you do anything? Think about it. You know what I mean? Like people lose that drive. I still believe vision for entrepreneurs, it's ambition, vision, execution, persistence, luck, timing, resilience, and focus. I definitely still think persistence is one, resilience is 1B, but not saying I like Trump at all. But if you think of Trump and think of his stamina, the energy, relentlessness, I think that is probably something that media, writers of successful people sometimes forget. The stamina you need to stay at it is really, I think, what separates like winners from aspirants to win.
Yeah.
Because everybody is competing for the same thing. I'm a very persistent, resilient guy, but I also am like pragmatic. So sometimes I'm like, this person doesn't get it. Do I want to invest time and energy to help them see the light, so to speak? And I'm wrong too. And I'm open to others telling me when I'm wrong. But what I realize is it's actually that drive, that stamina. It's like you need that just fuel and fire. which could be manifested as persistence, but it's actually stronger than persistence. It's just, you can be persistent, but be a low energy mofo. You're not going to succeed.
Do you think that's why some of the competition that cropped up around that time has since like kind of evaporated, where WatchMojo is still here 10 years later? What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I mean, I've always believed in, stories of people and things and events. And I was doing this when there was no money in web video, when there was no money in YouTube. So I will do it now, whether we're making money or not. I believe in that. I do think that like a lot of competition or a lot of phonies and, entrepreneurs and, people who just see a near-term opportunity. But I've always said, like, if you're going to do anything, don't do something because of today. Skate to where the puck is going. Where are the fish swimming? You got to plan 1 or 2 years ahead. So yeah, most of our competitors, they just kind of didn't have that stamina or that maybe the patience or the persistence. When your former employer kind of threw in the towel of YouTube, I didn't bash them. I was like, you have your own websites. I understand why you're going to put your energy there, but it was a bit nearsighted because YouTube is where the audience is. So if near term you don't see the KPIs or the return, yeah, you're just like any other fucking phony. And I'm not talking about them. I'm just saying in general, I see this in business all the time. I've seen it for the first 10 years when WatchMojo was still just like an expensive hobby. I was also developing some tech projects, and those tech projects, I was like, these have to be winner take all, but they're not there yet. It's, do I think in 2-3 years they're going to be there? And most people, the biggest fucking thing VCs, venture capitalists did to fuck up the entire entrepreneurship mindset is putting in money and hoping that they scale things overnight with more capital, which is such a recipe for disaster. That's like cooking. Shit, I realize I have something on the stove, but it's low heat. It takes so much time. It takes patience. You can't crank the heat to a maximum and hope that your food cooks faster. You're just going to have a pretty shitty dish.
Talking about innovating or dying, you mentioned MTV earlier, and that's a really interesting case because, everybody kind of knows what happened with MTV, where they made a hard turn away from music, which was their bread and butter throughout the 90s. And into more of like a youth culture thing, doing reality TV and stuff like that. How do you evaluate that decision? And ultimately, MTV, it failed to have the maybe cultural impact that it did when it was based on music. But like, what's your assessment of their decision making there?
So I know we had a workshop. I'd also love your thoughts if you want to touch on it. We had a workshop, the second one. The first one was copyright fair use. The second one was brand, purpose, programming, people, principles, balancing it with the pursuit of profit. A lot of P's there, like alliterations. But one of our board members was with us to chime in, and she had worked at MTV at the time. And to her credit, she said, yeah, on the one hand, I was at MTV when we pivoted away from music videos. And then she added, to her credit, you could make the case that it was a foolish mistake. And after she was done, I said, hey, great feedback, great anecdote and analogy. But I said, had MTV not shifted away from music and done the other crap, they would have died sooner, because music videos with the web was going in a different direction. You had Napster, you had many other things, Kazaa, Crapster, whatever you want to call it. I'm like, yeah, it wasn't like MTV by not adapting was going to survive. So that is actually paradoxically, yeah, there you go. So this is like, again, infancy, growth, decline, death. And knowing me, I drew parallels between as a person, how you could change, as a product and as a company. It's an article I wrote like probably 5-6 years ago. But the point I'm getting at is MTV, I think, was doomed because of cable declining eventually and music videos, and the fact that they brought in a fucking bunch of accountants and lawyers to run it. Like I studied finance, and I've always said, I'm like, I'm going to add a little bit of mustard. I care more about the content and the video than any of you guys do. I know it sounds ballsy, and I shouldn't say it because you all love the content too, but we've worked on a few projects this year where I'm sure you're like, fuck Ash, like we don't need that B-roll. I know you want that line, let it go, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about? Nobody will care more about people in the story than I do. And the reality is when MTV brought the fucking Philippe Darman, why are you bringing a lawyer to run MTV? If I studied finance, so we never have to have a fucking accountant run the company. But so MTV was both like micro, macro, seasonal, timely. It ran its course. But for us, this is what I tell the team. It might sound annoying. We're on YouTube. It's the greatest thing. It's entering its golden era. But get out of your fucking shell. If I'm not like sitting here resting on our laurels, why the fuck are any of you sitting there thinking our shit doesn't stink? Like, you have to improve. You have to change. You know, like when I cook, I want every meal to be than the previous fucking dish I made. So my frustration is that, and the execs tell me sometimes, and I've grown a bit more zen, I can't be in people's faces every day and telling them like, be better, hustle more, skate faster, chase the puck. At some point, you're like, we won 4-2. Okay, you didn't like the 2 goals. You wish you could have scored 6 more. But it is challenging because I'm like, guys, you know what? If MTV is, they're not irrelevant, but if what MTV was, they lost their relevance, why do you think WatchMojo is not going to succumb to that? Again, with democratization of production, no barriers to entry.
So then in that case, do you think it's a better idea to iterate slowly and make incremental changes rather than just like make a hard left turn and like venture into uncharted territory just at a greater risk?
All of the above. All of it, everything. You have to do everything. What you need to do is, like, if you had like a portfolio, you need, let's say at 5, because you also don't want to spread yourself too thin. You need 2 things that are like iterative. You need 1 thing that's evolutionary. You need 1 thing that's revolutionary. And you need 1 fucking BHAG where you're aiming for the fence, where you want people to make fun of you. And that's when Michael Clemens, F you, F you, F you. It's fine. You know, Citizen, what is that? Teddy Roosevelt, Citizen in the Arena, whatever. I forgot the name, but it's like, forget the haters. You're the man in the arena. You're the one getting your face dirtied, bloodied. You know, but yeah, you have to do it all. You know, like, you have to do it all. My regret is not the iterative evolutionary things like Miss Mojo or adapting us to Snap. My regret is listening to the losers and the idiots and the clueless and the lost at sea and not going more towards the revolutionary, totally disruptive things. Like, and that's what I'm doing now more. And also, I have no problem telling people, you know what? Interesting. That was a load of bullshit. And this is why that sounds stupid, because the people need to hear that. I heard it. I heard it all my life. If I heard it, why can't you hear it? You know?
Is that where this mad scientist article comes in, which you published on Context?
Well, that was still very diplomatic. The mad scientist article was more explaining what we were doing. You know, oftentimes I'll get like an investor, an advisor, an employee, and when I find myself repeating, it is easier to write something, because if I share an article, it's not like I'm debating you. You're not going to be defensive. You're going to be like, ooh, interesting. You know what I mean? So the mad scientist just kind of if you want to scroll down, I think just explained a little bit the concept of like iterative and evolutionary and revolutionary. And that's actually what I need to start thinking about, which is how do I kind of keep the trains on the track, but really start to go back and listen to my own inner voice and just do the shit that we need to do, because otherwise, WatchMojo, any company, you become MTV, you become Eastman Kodak.
Right. Oh, here we have the article again.
Here we have the article, yeah. And I believe the results are, yeah, there you go. Henry Luce, publisher. A lot of articles. There's always an article, as I tell people. Anytime somebody asks me a question, I'm like, years ago. Here you go read this. All right.
Yeah, we have poll results from the poll that we left earlier. So we were asking, from their perspective of a company, what is their best bet to secure their future? Innovate at the risk of dying, pretend to innovate, but just coast, or keep milking what they're doing. And 65% of people said risk it for the biscuit, innovate at the risk of dying. 23% said just pretend to innovate, but coast, which, you know, I guess, I don't know. Can you think of an example of a company who has kind of done that? Like kind of faux innovated, but just really kept on doing the same thing?
Kruger. I watched Seinfeld. I'm kidding. No.
Kruger Industrial Smoothing. Is that what?
I will say that innovate at the risk of dying. I don't want to give too much credit to Google, but when Google's YouTube division embraced shorts, I was like, let's give them credit. They're willing to burn the house down. When I see, if I Google, you know, if I'm going to Rio at Web Summit and stopping by Buenos Aires, I'm like, what are some good hotels that, and I see that they're answering Gemini, I think is theirs. They're not, yeah, Gemini is theirs. When I see them disrupting themselves, I'm like, okay, so they're like willing, you could criticize their CEO on certain grounds, but I'm like, hey, you know, in the, when I'm watching them play, I'm like, they are innovating at the risk of dying. Pretend to innovate, but just coast, not anymore. But that was Microsoft until Satya Nadella, the current CEO. And I would say he is probably the CEO of the century. That is not a founder. Elon, you could hate him, but Elon is a CEO, founder, or not founder, but entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Steve Jobs was the OG and the GOAT. But I think Microsoft was like that under Steve Ballmer. And then keep milking it. I mean, that's more traditional, right? I mean, those are the Eastman Kodaks who were like, we don't want to get into digital photography, let's say. Or many other companies that just are like, we're good, we're making money. And what I experienced like 10 years ago when I would tell media executives about YouTube, it wasn't so much that they wanted to milk it, but I could see their complacency and laziness, because the CEO of a media company, of MTV, basically, was like, well, this isn't my problem. In a couple of years, I'm going to retire, or in 4 years, my contract is up and I'm going to go to another company. And then the moron who's going to replace me, he or she has to worry about this. Why would I worry about it? And I would be telling them respectfully, I'm like, I think your time is off. I'm like, this is your problem now. And you're going to have a harder time finding a replacement, succession planning, whatever you think your pension is worth. It ain't worth that, my friend. But the keep milking it is media. I mean, every media company, like I used to go meet Kevin and I used to go meet every fucking Canadian media company. My fucking God, we would meet them every 6 to 18 months. They would just repeat the same bullshit. They're all dead. You know, the newspaper companies, all dead. We met with Chorus, useless company. I apologize.
That's harsh.
No. From a financial perspective, when you just look at their P&L and their stock, operationally, people, I apologize. That a bit too much mustard there. Bell Media. You know, Bell Media, we've spoken to them sporadically every 5 years. They come up for air and they're like digital, this and that, but they're just so, but Bell Media is part of BCE. It's a telco. They don't care. But other companies that were pure play media companies, I was like, look, I'm just a weatherman. I'm telling you what's happening. You don't want to go out with shoes, let alone rain boots. You have no umbrella. Yeah, you're going to catch a cold. You know, what do you want me to tell you? Yeah. And now Michael Clemens, F you. I'm not here to clean your mess anymore.
If you look at the comments of some of our videos, like just being real, WatchMojo does get accused of milking it a lot.
You guys are crazy. You guys find one thing that works. I mean, I love you all, but it's like, tone it down, because I understand your heart's in the right place. Not you, all of you.
Well, I'm included in this.
But you guys, but I also don't want to be a hypocrite. It's balance. So when something works, I get it, because you want to be like, look, Dad, like, you know, you told me to clean my room. I cleaned my room. I cleaned the basement. I'm very empathetic. I get it. But this was like the challenge for the last couple of years, where I would come and I'd be like, let's do this. And I would get so much resistance. But I was like, guys, do you understand that we all, when I pushed the top 10 format or geek culture or Batman biography, you all thought, you're like, is there a shrink in the building? Like, Batman doesn't exist. Why would we do a biography? I was like, humor me. Lie to me, Jerry. You know? So, yeah, but we also don't milk it. Like, we are more, you know, ethical. Like, we don't do things that are just clickbaity. And it's all relative. Like, I understand why some people might say, oh, WatchMojo, you know, the accusation, which I'm like, that sometimes we put in an entry or do something to get people riled up. I'm like, no, motherfucker, we just made a mistake, you know, or we overlooked something.
Or that happens to be our opinion and you
disagree. And that's the best. But no. I mean, look, I think it's all relative. Like, again, compared to the other company in the city that shall remain nameless where you worked at and was taken down by the rap, they were accused more of that. Mm-hmm. And I think in the 2010 bullshit ZERP era, it made sense. But clearly, I don't think that is where the world is going when there's more voices, more authenticity, and, you know, more sincerity in a voice. I don't think anybody, by the way, I'm sure people are like, Ash is even more unhinged today than last week. But I don't think anybody could accuse us of lacking authenticity and sincerity. It's just, I wouldn't do this to come and read like a boilerplate corporate answer. So no, I don't think, you know, if somebody were to come off the street and be like, WatchMojo milks it, I would defend my team and be like, no, this is the way our editorial is. They don't, compared to these other examples. But vis-a-vis my team, when I feel you guys are too much on one end, yeah, it is my role to come and maybe ruffle some feathers and be like, guys, we need to change. We need to adapt, you know? So it's a balance, you know, it's like balance. You get internal, external, you get, and you hope not to make any fatal mistakes.
Looking back on your 2020 plans, are you satisfied with what WatchMojo has accomplished? Was it a success?
You know, again, the whole kid born in Iran could have died here. You know, I'm very grateful. So I, the individual, I mean, nothing but gratitude. I love the team. I think they see that. But as the CEO, I tell them, I go, I'm playing a role. Like, let's just be honest. And I go, you don't want some other guy coming on. I mean, I myself may one day be like, I'm bringing in Dick, who's a real Dick, and he's going to be running the show. Not really. And I alluded to it. I think I was a bit too diplomatic. I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. You know, there's a gentleman now who came back. Oh, another vindication. So
let's hear it.
I've never blackmailed anybody. And blackmailed, obviously not blackmailed. I've never blacklisted anybody. Never blacklisted anybody. So I mentioned this. There was a gentleman that now I'm working on a few of these projects. They've kind of thrown him at me. They're like, okay, if Ash wants to do this, you get to work with this gentleman. And I know him. I interviewed him. But he was like, oh, you know, when I resigned to go get a master's, and we didn't know where he was going, he was like, I knew that, like, the door would be open for me, type of thing. And when I heard that, I'm like, yeah, maybe I need to change that. I'm like, yeah, why do you think we're not going to blacklist you, but there's no fait accompli that you could just leave and come back, right? But what I'm getting at is, you want to work with people who are comfortable pushing the envelope and, you know, take risks, push when they need to, buy into the system, right? For us, when I look at 30 than 2020, I don't dwell on the mistakes. I'm like, we are here today, which is good. But then when I make decisions going forward for 2030, that's where I'm like, you have to understand why we maybe could have done more through the WatchMojo 2020 initiative, and why we're going to maybe hurt some feelings, ignore some people, push forward and break some walls because of what we did in the previous decade.
Okay. Good answer. I'm sorry. I lost myself because I was looking forward to what we're going to talk about next week to preview that episode. Yeah, if you want to wrap up anything for the 2020 portion of what we spoke about today.
No, so next week, actually, I think I like it. It's the whole brand building in the era of vanity, from the Expos to the Yankees. I mean, when you hear that, what the hell do you think? What the hell do you think that means, from the Expos to the Yankees?
Well, Expos is just a tragedy in my eyes. Like, I relish any opportunity to talk about them because it's just kind of like a sore spot. I miss baseball over here in Montreal, but I guess there's lessons to be learned from that too. And the Yankees, I mean, they're the brand name of the MLB, I guess. So
yeah, so basically, coming out of WatchMojo 2020, like when we started that initiative in 2016, eventually, not that you start drinking your own Kool-Aid at all, but more saying, hey, maybe we could aim for the fence, be bigger. So we went and we just went crazy over hiring, investing, and bringing in a lot of executives and doing live shows. It was an intense period, you know. So we'll talk about that. We'll dive into, you know, managing your own pride. A little bit of pride is good. Hubris is bad. We all have egos. So that's, I think, what's on deck next week.
Cool. Sounds good. Looking forward to it, and can't wait to see what the commenters have to say about today's episode.
We love you all. We love you all. That's all.
Nothing but love.
Nothing but love.
All right. Thanks again, Ash.
Some tough
Always
love.
great
Thank
talking to you.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Take care.